your cup. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual field talk. My name is Sharon Bowen. I'm one of the education managers here at the Maryland Zoo. We would like to start off first by thanking SC&H Group for their sponsorship of this virtual field talk series. Their sponsorship is making it possible for us to open up this experience to all who would like to join. Before we welcome our guest speaker, just a few housekeeping items. We're going to be here for about 60 minutes. My colleagues who are running the tech behind the scenes will reach out to you through the chat feature with additional information throughout the talk. You are also welcome to use the chat feature if you need technical assistance. Your video and microphone will remain off, but we encourage you to submit questions through the Q&A feature. All right, so today we are pleased to highlight the work of the Okapi Conservation Project. And I am delighted to introduce to you Lucas Mears, who is Program Officer for the Okapi Conservation Project. Lucas studied biology and marine science at Jacksonville University, then worked in development for the university, but he ultimately pursued his passion for wildlife at Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, initially in a development position, and eventually found his way to the zoo's conservation department, where he currently coordinates conservation efforts for the Jacksonville Zoo with a particular focus on the Okapi Conservation Project. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to our speaker. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sharon, and hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? I think so. I think I'm good. I just wanted to say thank you again to Maryland Zoo for having me today, and thank you for everyone attending. Thanks to Sharon and all the tech staff working behind the scenes. I know how much work it takes to put on events like these for very needy people like me. But I'm here to talk to you today about Okapi Conservation Project. Okapi are one of my favorite animals, as I'm sure one of your favorite animals, or something that you're interested in learning about if you're here listening to me today. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Make sure I get presentation mode. Okay. So like Sharon said, my name is Lucas Mears. I am the Conservation Program Officer for the Okapi Conservation Project, and my role in this my duties in this role are wide-ranging, everything from program development to fundraising to marketing, social media, pretty much everything under the sun that needs to be done for a conservation project. I have my hand in some capacity. So I kind of get an experience of a well-rounded experience for Okapi Conservation Project. So a little bit about me and a few embarrassing photos. Like many of you who are tuning in today, I have always had a passion for animals, wildlife, just nature in general. I had this weird thing when I was younger of putting animals on my face. That was a phase. But I have always been immersed in wildlife. I was always fortunate to grow up in the country, in the wilderness. And I love animals so much that I even got my engagement photos taken at the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens with a few curious giraffe. And I've actually been doing a lot of sea turtle work, volunteer sea turtle work on the beaches of Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm based. I've been doing that for about 10 years, but ultimately Okapi is what I'm here to talk to you about. And that's what we'll get into. Okay, so Okapi are only found in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the DRC is what I'll call it from now on, is the most biodiverse country in Africa, and arguably the most, or one of the most biodiverse countries in the entire world. It's where all of our staff are based in Congo. We're based in the Ituri Forest in the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. And this biodiversity, DRC ranks in the highest rankings of almost all taxonomic groups, except for plants, which I think South Africa has the highest diversity of plants. But as far as mammals, birds, insects, reptiles, amphibians, they have the highest number of biodiversity in DRC. It's a closed canopy forest. This is one of my favorite photos, just the wide expanse of forests. And because it's a closed canopy forest, very little light actually reaches the understory or the forest floor, which makes it perfect for Okapi and their camouflage. So this is one of our camera trap videos, and you can see the Okapi just walks 10 feet in front of the camera and just disappears as it stands still. And so, because the forest is so dense, and with the added benefit of the stripes on its haunches helps break up its shape, it blends very well into the forest. And so this is one of their techniques to avoid their main predators, leopards. And so Ituri Forest has the highest density of leopards in all of Africa. And as you can see by this camera trap video, the leopards in the forest tend to be a little bit darker, almost to what you would naturally consider a melanistic form. But you can still clearly see the rosettes on its, well, not now because it's hiding. You can clearly see the rosettes on its coat, but they just tend to be a little bit denser. And that's also an added benefit so we can sneak up on Okapi. So the Okapi's main point in living, all of its natural history, all of its behaviors are all surrounded around the avoidance of that main predator of leopards. So when Okapi calves are born, this is a photo of an Okapi calf, they hide in what we will consider a nest. They don't put things together, but they'll just kind of tuck themselves between buttress roots of a tree, or they'll hide behind a log or next to a fallen tree or something like that. And the mother actually goes away for extended periods of time. And so I'm sure there's a lot of keepers on this call. So keepers know that if you're caring for Okapi at a zoo, you typically have to have a hiding place for the calf. And this is to mimic that natural behavior of them hiding in a nest. And so when it's time for the calf to nurse, the mother will actually call via infrasound. So she'll send sound waves through her feet, through the ground, that the young can hear, that the calf can hear. And the calf will come out of the nest to nurse and then go back into the nest. And the mother never actually visits the nest. And this is thought to avoid leaving her scent by the calf, so that the calf isn't found by leopards. And that's also why they communicate through infrasound, so below the leopard's hearing. And another interesting strategy, and this is one of the coolest facts that I always share to everyone, is that the Okapi calf will not defecate. It won't poop for the first about 60 days of its life. And that's also thought to not leave any scent that leopards can find. But once the calf grows to be about 2 or 3 months, then it'll start following the mom around. And so I can't talk about Okapi Conservation Project without sharing a little bit about our history. And so history goes way back, particularly in this region. I'll go back to the early 1900s. So Belgium actually owned the land of Democratic Republic of Congo, what we call it now, from the early 1900s through 1960, when DRC gained its independence. And then it was called Zaire. It changed its name in 1997 to Democratic Republic of Congo. But when it was owned by Belgium, Ipulu, where we're based, in the Ituri forest, was a Belgian outpost. So there were hundreds of thousands of tourists visiting this area. They had Okapi in their facility. This is a historical photo, clearly. I don't think there's any zoo in the world that can successfully house 9 Okapi together. I know that there's 3, 4, maybe 5 Okapi that are housed together on occasion, but I have never seen 9 Okapi housed together at once. But this was essentially a tourist stopover for anyone that was traveling through Africa at the time. People could come and actually see Okapi. And so when we were founded in 1987, we were founded with the task not only to rehabilitate the Belgian outpost, because when DRC gained independence in 1960, Ipulu was abandoned, essentially. People still lived there, but it was not well run. The Okapi were no longer there. So we were brought in by the government this was before my time, we were brought in by the government to rehabilitate the Belgian outpost, bring Okapi back to the station. But then we were also brought in to help give more genetics to the population of Okapi in the United States. So we were founded in 1987 as a breeding and research facility for Okapi. And we would actually capture Okapi, put them in captivity in our care. and then we would breed them. And then once the young were old enough to be separated from the adults, 3 of those Okapi were actually sent to the United States to reinvigorate some of the genetics, because they were Okapi in US zoos were having a lot of genetic issues due to inbreeding. So they needed some new genetic lines to refresh some of the genes. And so when we, over the course of 3 or 4 years from 89 to 1992, is when we imported 3 Okapi from Upolu. And you can see that that actually started to improve the genetics and the number of Okapi that were in human care. I think worldwide, including Europe and also South Africa, there's a total of about 183 Okapi in human care. And the European version of our SSP, the Species Survival Plan, which is US Zoos, the EEP, they are doing an incredible job of breeding Okapi, and the Okapi populations in human care are flourishing. One of those Okapi is Romakari. He was brought over into the US in, I believe, 1991. During that time, he was one of those 3 Okapi, and he's still living. He is 31 years old. And this is myself and my wife with Romakari 2 years ago at White Oak Conservation Center up in Yulee, Florida, just a little bit north of me. So he's still living. He is post-reproductive, so he's living out his happy life at White Oak. But Romakari actually got his name from Rosemary Roof, who's our in-country director, Rosemary, R-O-M-A. Her late husband, Carl, K-A, Carl Roof. And then R.I. is Rick Barungi, who is the former director of Houston Zoo. So he has a history with his name. Oh, hold on. Why is it not? Hold on. I might have to stop sharing my screen 1 second. There we go. Okay. Let me share again. My slides weren't advancing. Okay. So our project is very remote. So it usually takes about 2.5 to 3 days to travel to Upolu from Jacksonville, Florida. I go over there once or twice a year. I did not go last year because of COVID, but I'm hoping to get back there this upcoming year once vaccines are widely distributed. But it takes several plane rides, several vehicle rides to actually get to our remote location in Upolu. And so we'll fly to Uganda, and then we'll cross the border into DRC, and we'll take a charter flight to our Upolu because we have an airstrip. But typically, this is the visual that you see from the plane flying from Uganda into Democratic Republic of Congo. You see kind of like the occasional tree. You see lots of houses, lots of thatch roofs. But then once you cross the border into the reserve, you see an incredible expanse of that closed canopy forest. And it just goes for miles and miles. It's incredible. We much prefer to fly because the infrastructure for the roads is pretty horrific. This photo was just taken last week by one of our staff in Upolu, Bears, who is traveling around the reserve, sharing radio broadcasts with our educator, Monga. But this is what they're dealing with right now. It's actually more efficient to travel via motorbike because you can circumvent and go between all of these trucks, these trapped trucks. But infrastructure is one of the main difficulties that we have, along with political insecurity. There's a lot of struggles that we deal with, particularly with infrastructure. And so once we're here, this is where our station is, Upolu. And the bottom, you can see kind of like a little hexagonal building. That's one of our buildings on our site. In the top right corner of the photo, you can see kind of the edge of the town of Upolu. So we're right on the outskirts of Upolu, which is the capital, the headquarters of the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. That's where ICCN, the Institute in Congo for the Conservation of Nature, is headquartered. And you can see that bridge that's crossing the river right there. That is NR4, National Route 4. And that is the highway that actually bisects the entire continent of Africa. So as you can imagine, we get a lot of traffic that actually comes through. That's why the roads are so horrible. A lot of the big shipping trucks, they're the ones that get trapped in the horrible road conditions. And so the ICCN actually monitors the traffic in and out of the reserve. And the reserve is only open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So once 6 p.m. hits, they close the borders of the reserve and no one can enter the reserve until the next morning at 6 a.m. But Upulu, if they're in the reserve and the reserve ends up closing, then they do have to stay somewhere. So there's several little hotels and stuff in the little towns along the road within the reserve. And so this is the location. In that red box is where the Okapi Wildlife Reserve is. We're in northeastern DRC. And in orange is the estimated range of the Okapi. The Okapi Wildlife Reserve was created in 1992 because we needed a specific area in Congo that was dedicated to protecting the endangered Okapi, which had been protected in 1933, but there were no protected areas specifically intended to protect Okapi. And it is believed that the Okapi population within the Okapi Wildlife Reserve is the densest throughout its entire range. It's difficult to get population estimates outside of the reserve just because of the insecurity in the region. There are rebel groups hiding in the forest, and it's too dangerous for people to do foot transects. But we are exploring opportunities with camera trap studies that limit the amount of people needed to be in the forest and to be much more cost efficient. So we're exploring those for the coming years. But within that red box is the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. And it was created in 1992. And the purpose of the reserve was not only to create a protected area for Okapi, but we wanted to ensure that the people that lived in the borders were able to continue living there and sustaining their lives. A lot of times when protected areas are created, particularly national parks, the people that are living within those borders have to move outside of the national parks. And sometimes that can create a lot of controversy and a lot of difficulty, but we wanted to ensure that the people were as much a part of the reserve as the animals and the plants and nature were. So we wanted to ensure that they were able to continue living their lives in their homes that they had been at for several years. So to do that, we needed to create a little bit of a balance for the people and the animals. And so how we did that was we created agricultural zones, which you could see the little white areas on the map. These are specific demarcated, designated areas where people can farm to their heart's content. They can farm whatever they want, as long as they stay within those borders. And then we also wanted to ensure that the Mbuti pygmies, which are an indigenous tribe of people that live in the forest, that they were able to continue their traditional ways of life. And so you can kind of see that yellowish, brownish, greenish color. Those are specific hunting zones that the Mbuti are allowed to hunt specific species. They're not allowed to hunt any endangered animals, but smaller things like blue duikers, yellow-backed duikers, the much smaller hoofstock, they can hunt to sustain their traditional lifestyle. And then you can see that there's two large lime green areas and one small lime green area. Those are central core zones where no human activities are allowed. So essentially that's kind of a national park. People aren't allowed to live in there. People aren't allowed to access it unless there's special scientific research permission to go in and do any sort of studies on wildlife, but that you need special permits and special permission to access that land. I do want to clarify that when the reserve was created, no one actually lived in that lime green area. Everyone lived along the two main roads of the Okapi Wildlife Reserve, which is the N4 road, that bright orange road that kind of bisects that is in the lower third, and then the border on the right, the east border, is another road. And so that's where all of the civilization was when the reserve was created. So no one was moved out of these areas when the reserve was created back in 1992. For some reason, oh, there we go. Okay. I mentioned the Mabuti pygmies. So they are nomadic net hunters. And so they will have several camps throughout the region. And so they'll move from camp to camp every couple of months. And they live in these traditional huts made with sticks and leaves. And then they'll hunt in that area. And then they'll move all of their stuff to another area, and then they'll hunt in a new area and allow the wildlife and the plants to renourish. And then they'll kind of make a rotation throughout these specific areas. They are traditional net hunters. The gentleman on the right, that's actually a net on his head. So what they do is they will have the men actually go out to set up the net. It's about waist high, between knee and waist high, and they'll make the net in a big U. And then the men will stand and wait on the bottom of the U. And then the women and children will actually go to the top of the U and kind of flush the animals into the net. And then once they actually capture an animal, they'll stop the hunt. So they don't catch anything more than they need. They are subsistence hunters. And so they'll catch one animal, and that will be dinner for that evening. And then they harvest plants and fungus and other sorts of things for them to eat. So we have three main priorities with all of our programs: wildlife protection, community assistance, and conservation education. With wildlife protection, we work under a contract of collaboration with the ICCN. I mentioned them a little bit earlier, the Institute in Congo for Conservation of Nature. They're the government authority tasked with protecting all of the protected areas throughout Democratic Republic of Congo. And so there are roughly 150 to 200 rangers in the Okapi Wildlife Reserve that go out on patrol to remove any miners, arrest poachers, and ensure the protection of the area. So we support ICCN through financial support, whether it's paying for some of their bonuses or salaries, or supporting communication equipment, infrastructure. We do provide, we have an expert construction staff that actually coordinates the construction of buildings throughout the reserve. He will build any outposts or guard posts or living quarters for ICCN eco guards. But like I said, their main focus is to protect the reserve. Several threats in the reserve are slash and burn farming, and mining and poaching are the main threats to the reserve. So mining, particularly gold and diamond mining, are the biggest threats. On this slide, you can see on the left, this is what a gold mine looks like. A typical, this is an artisanal gold mine. People are coming in, kind of digging around looking for gold. And you can see the contrast between that photo and the video that I showed of the wide expanse of the forest once you get into the reserve. But we do see instances of mines in the reserve like this. And then with these specific mines, then on the right, you have to have a place to house the miners. So then they start building houses and huts to live. And then when you're in the middle of the forest, you also need to eat. So then they start hunting animals in this area. So it becomes kind of a snowball effect when gold mining is in the reserve. So you have the destruction of the forest from the mine, you have the destruction of the forest to make room for these houses, but then you also have the hunting of the animals to feed all of the people, all of the miners. And it's all to look for gold. So what the ICCN Rangers do is mining. For mining, you're typically, the smaller scale mines is more of local people trying to support their families. So typically if ICCN rangers encounter miners or encounter a mine, they'll close down the mine and they'll escort the miners out of the reserve with a warning and kind of explain the laws that they're not allowed to mine inside of the reserve. Technically they can mine outside of the reserve, but they're just given a warning for their first offense. If they're caught a second time, then they will be arrested. For poachers, they will immediately arrest the poachers. And the poachers are mostly there for elephant ivory. And we don't get the traditional savanna elephants that you see in zoos. We actually have forest elephants, which a lot of scientists are starting to think that they are starting to believe that they are a separate species. Their ivory is much, much more dense. Therefore, it's more coveted, it's more expensive. And their tusks actually point straight down, whereas a lot of the savanna elephants that you see in photos and videos and Nat Geo episodes, their tusks point almost straight outward. But forest elephants' tusks point downward so they can actually maneuver through the forest much easier. And then one thing that I always find very interesting is the forest elephants will always have 4, usually 5 toenails on the back of each foot, whereas their savanna cousins will have 3, maybe 4 toenails on their back feet. And it's always interesting to make that comparison because with the forest elephants, with the 5 toes on the back of each foot, also Asian elephants have 5 toes on the back of each foot. So that's one of the ways that scientists are starting to believe that forest elephants are actually their own special species. They also tend to be a little bit smaller too than the African cousins. But poachers are there for elephant ivory. And so the last trip that we made to Congo was they had just confiscated this firearm and these tusks the day we were leaving. And that tusk was very, very heavy. That's by hand in the photo. And so the second pillar is community assistance. And that's kind of a broad topic. We do so much for community assistance because if you don't get the involvement of the community in your work, you will not be successful. Working with communities is key for any successful conservation program. And so you really want to make sure that the communities are empowered, they're involved, and that you're improving their livelihoods along with preserving what you're trying to protect, Okapi. In this instance. So we work with women's groups. We have 5 women's groups located around the reserve. And through this program, there's about 200 women over the 5 women's groups. Through this program, we empower women to generate income for their families. And this gives them a larger voice within the community. So what they do is we provide them with the training needed and the supplies needed to build their own micro enterprises, mostly embroidery, sewing, things like that. And so they'll make a lot of items for the communities to sell in the markets. They'll make school uniforms for their children. And all of this goes into a collective pot for that women's group that any woman in the group can draw upon whenever she's fallen on hard times or needs access to funding, whether it's to pay for healthcare costs, school fees, to keep their kids in school, or if it's to put a new roof on their house, they can draw upon that pot of money to do anything in their lives that they need to do. And it provides a sense of empowerment. And within the community, if you have money, if you're bringing money to the table, you have a much louder voice in the community and people will start to listen to you. So that kind of gives them a much larger voice in the community. Plus, in our experience, at least here, women tend to be much better forward thinkers than men. And I will admit that with my wife. But they tend to think more long-term, and the benefits of protecting forests long-term for the benefit of not only Okapi, but also the people that are living in the area. Things have adapted since COVID hit. So because school was not in session, they didn't have to make school uniforms. They were limited to meeting in 10 or less people. Usually they would meet a few times a week with 50 or so people at a time, but they had to meet and make rotations with no more than 10 people. They started making masks for the community as more preventative measures, and they would actually sell them in the community. Sometimes they would give them away if someone just needed a mask, but they adapted their enterprises to make masks for the local communities. And so most recently, we are in the process of constructing buildings for these women to work. If you noticed, a lot of the photos were women working outside and being in the rainforest. It rains a lot, so a lot of their work is dependent upon the weather. And so by providing a covered space for them to work, they can not only work through inclement weather, they have dry storage for all of their materials to safeguard their materials. They can lock their materials up. It just provides a more structured place for them to work. Plus, having a new building, I don't know, it improves morale, and it also, we've seen it increase their yields, how much they can actually make and sell for the community. And so this is our women's group in Apulu. This was when we visited in 2019. This was the structure they were currently working under. We provided them the materials and the training, but again, they were subject to the weather because they didn't have a covered space to work. And so through a very generous donor, through the Wildlife Conservation Network, we were able to construct a building. This is the new building, and we are just wrapping up the construction of the furniture inside. This picture was taken last week. Just finishing up the construction of the furniture inside, and then we do have to install the solar system. And we're planning to have the grand opening ceremony on International Women's Day on March 8th. As kind of a huge announcement and a huge thank you to women. And so we're excited of what this could bring for this women's group in Apulu. So far, this is only the second building of the 5 that we plan on building. If you have an extra $60,000 laying around, we'll gladly take some off your hands to build one in one of the other 3 villages that we're looking to build them in. And then when I was there, they actually allowed me to play on the sewing machine. If you know me, I'm an avid sewer myself. I do make a lot of bow ties. I will say that those sewing machines are much more difficult to use than my pedal powered one at home, my electric one at home. The hand crank one I'm not that good at it. Another community assistance program that we have is Agroforestry, and this is probably our biggest and it's our longest running program. So before I said that one of the biggest threats to the reserve is slash and burn agriculture. And so that is when people one year will cut down a plot of trees and plant their crops. Those crops take out all the nutrients, and then the next year they actually have to cut down another plot of land. And they do that every year. So they're essentially encroaching into the forest. And so what this program does, it is strategic with crop rotation and incorporating nitrogen fixing plants so that the farmer can use the same plot of land up to 10 years without having to encroach any further into the forest. And it also reduces the amount of time that the land needs to lay fallow or abandoned or unused so that it can start generating more nutrients again. And so this process allows them to basically use the same plot of land over and over and over again so that they're not encroaching into the forest. And because the main idea for our programs is to protect the forest. If you protect the forest, you're protecting Okapi. And so that's kind of the main idea behind agroforestry. As part of our agroforestry, we also do a lot of reforestation efforts. So we plant a lot of native trees. We actually have local people. We pay local people to actually go out and collect seeds. And then we propagate those seeds in these nurseries throughout the reserve. And when the trees become seedlings, when they grow into seedlings, we'll have big events where we can outplant them in reforest areas. This is in Apulu. This is the Okapi Ipulu School with a lot of the children. The school was built on an abandoned plot of land years ago, but they didn't have any shade. So, and it gets hot. And so what we did was we actually did a reforestation campaign to start planting seedlings around their school to provide them shade to play in, and also expand habitat for the monkeys and animals that live in the surrounding forests. And so over the past several years, we've planted 70,000 trees each year. And then with each year, we're hoping to build up to 80,000 trees this coming year. And so this gentleman is Mr. Galo. He is part of our agroforestry program, and he lives on the outskirts of Ipulu. He is a bean farmer. He's growing lots of beans. And he came to us last June 2020, to say that he has an Okapi visiting his plot of land. And so we took a few photos, and it was interesting because this Okapi was actually tolerating the presence of humans from a distance. And this was an exciting find. This is something that you really never see. John, who founded the Okapi project in 1987, has never seen a wild Okapi. Rosie, our in-country director, has never seen a wild Okapi in the 33 plus years. And so this Okapi was just casually coming out of the forest and feeding on his bean leaves. And so we decided to set up camera traps. And he's an older male, and our educators named him Nimbongo after the area of the forest that he was found in. And we got that name approved by the chief of the village. And so this older male is known as Nimbongo. And you see him just casually feeding on a leaf here, a leaf there. And that's typically what Okapi do. That is their lifestyle. They can eat over 100 different kinds of plants. But what they do is they will nibble on one leaf, take a few steps, nibble on another leaf, take a few steps. And so they're essentially, they're browsers, but they're not feeding in one specific location, feeding on one specific plant. I'm getting a little sniff of the camera there. What we've interestingly seen, and we haven't had any formal documentation on this, but we'll actually see an Okapi bite and break the tip of a branch, which naturally causes the plant to start bushing out. I don't know if there's any gardeners out there, but typically if you deadhead your plants, or if you are snipping or trimming any trees or bushes, they tend to bush out a lot more. So in theory, there's a lot of speculation, but this is just anecdotal evidence. We're thinking that our Okapi really thinking that far ahead that they can snap a branch and then the plant will flush out. So more studies need to be done on that, but that's a behavior that we've seen in a lot of our camera trap videos lately. So we're curious about what's going on with that. This is just a second video of Nimbongo because I think it's the coolest thing ever. We have so many videos of Nimbongo, and you guys are here to see Okapi, so I wanted to include a lot of camera trap videos. And so what we expect him to do, as males naturally do, is he'll go off, he'll actually leave this area, he'll be frequenting another part of his territory a lot more often, maybe in search of a female. So we expect him to leave sometime soon, and then he'll be back maybe in a couple months. And so we're kind of on the lookout for that to see kind of what happens and how this all pans out. But he's been visiting since June of last year. And so I talked a little bit about our camera traps. This is me with some of our ICCN Rangers. There's Mongo, one of our education staff members, who's also an ICCN Ranger Eco Guard in the brown hat there. And so we are in the process of just doing camera trap studies on presence, absence of specific species in the region. So we set up camera traps to collect footage of any animals that we could potentially get that are around the area of Upolu. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of Okapi around Upolu, which is really exciting. It further reinforces that the population of Okapi is still pretty dense. There's we estimate about 3,000 to 3,500 Okapi in the reserve, about 15,000, which is a rough estimate throughout their entire range, but 3,000 to 3,500 in the reserve. Every time we walk into the forest, you'll notice that they have guns. We do have armed escorts every time we go into the forest. Anytime you go into the forest, there's always a chance of encountering a rebel group. And we just want to make sure that we have protection while we're there. Our OCP compound is monitored by ICCN eco guards and rangers, armed rangers, 24 hours a day, just for that added protection. We have reliable informants in the community that provide information on local where the Mai groups are, the rebel groups are in the forest, and that kind of keeps us abreast of any potential security breaches. We have safe protocols in place to ensure the safety of all of our staff, just to maintain, to be able to maintain our programs. Our staff are incredibly dedicated. Congo is one of the most hostile environments to work in conservation in particular, and it's the staff like Manga and bears that are the most resilient people and able to work in such a difficult environment. This is one of our older camera trap videos. If you are following Okapi Conservation Project, we actually shared this news a year or two ago. This was actually the first ever video of a young Okapi calf filmed in the wild. And so the female is in the still right there, the mother. So we had actually been seeing her for a long time. We saw that she was pregnant, and then we kept getting her on camera trap, but we saw she was pregnant in December of 2017. And then we collected several other camera trap videos of her over the course of a few months. And then you can see that this camera trap video was captured on February 13th, 2018. And so that falls right in that 2-month period of the Okapi calf hiding away in a nest. And then starting after that 2-month period, starting to follow the mother around on a much regular basis. And here's the little Okapi calf. You can kind of see that the calf has a little bit of a mane. Okapi calves, when they're younger, they do have a little bit of a mane, about 1 inch or 2 long, and then they actually lose that as they grow older. So we're expanding our camera trap program into an area called Mewa, which is, we call it an Edo in Congo, EDO. In the US, you might call it a glade or an opening in the forest. For those of you that have seen the Wild Thornberrys movie, every time I see this picture, I think of the Wild Thornberrys movie, where the herds of forest elephant would come and congregate. It is so characteristic of that. But it's a natural clearing in the forest that attracts several animals. You can see some of their walking paths to the water source. Here's one of the photos of our forest elephants. That elephant on the far right, you can kind of see smaller tusks that are pointing straight down. That's characteristic of a forest elephant. But they come here to have an open access to water, collect minerals from the clay and the mud, to help them digest, or if they're not able to get any of the necessary minerals for digestion in their natural diet, they'll come and eat clay and mud. And there are some salt licks occasionally here. And here is an Okapi, just walking through one of these open areas. It's not too common to see Okapi walking in open areas. So this is this was relatively new for us. We typically only see them in the dense forests. So peaceful. But then we're also collecting other footage. The grass grows fast. So of course, when I was going through all of our camera trap videos, we had several videos of just the grass moving in the wind because the camera traps are motion sensitive. So those were a collection of bongo. This is a forest elephant. Again, you can see its tusks are pointing straight down. This video is a little bit terrifying. The eyes are just so creepy to me, but then you get closer and then you see those incredible eyelashes. And then you can see the hairs on the trunk, those really sensitive hairs. Oh, so incredible. And so with our camera trap program, this is, I forgot to mention that that's part of our third pillar is conservation education. So I talked about wildlife protection with the ICC and rangers, community assistance with the women's groups in agroforestry. We also provide clean, fresh water sources and a lot of healthcare for the people of the reserve. But the camera traps are part of our conservation education. And so here is one of the ways that we're incorporating the Mabuti pygmy because they know this forest like the back of their hand. They've lived in this forest for millennia. These are the local chiefs of the different pygmy tribes. And so we are soliciting their assistance to help with the camera traps. And so we'll compensate them, and then they actually check a lot of our camera traps for us. They help us find signs of Okapi. They help us find evidence of Okapi. And so after this meeting, it was within 2 weeks that one of the local pygmy chiefs actually found evidence of a female and a Okapi calf just near Apulu. And so the calf was following the female, and they actually they were pretty strategic. They used blades of grass to show the size of the footprints because it happened so fast that we didn't have time to get any molds for any footprints or anything. So they actually used blades of grass to show the size, and then they collected a few fecal pellets for us so we can keep tracking this female and the youngster. Also part of education is World Okapi Day. And so this was launched in October 18th, 2016, I believe. And it was kind of it had been some chatter amongst the zoo community of setting up a World Okapi Day. And it was actually one of the keepers from the Greater Orlando AZAC chapter that reached out to me. And so we kind of decided on October 18th to be the day. We wanted to make sure that it would still be a little bit warm for the northern zoos with Okapi to have Okapi outside. I don't know what the temperature threshold is for Okapi at Maryland Zoo, and if it's too cold on October 18th, but we tried to pick a day. It really has no special significance. It was just a day that didn't have any other animal days on it, and there weren't any other ungulate days around that time. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for Okapi to get some focus. So the first year it actually started in zoos around the world. It was the second year that we actually brought it to the reserve, where we planned celebrations all around the reserve for kids, our women's groups, Mabuti Pygmies. And so it has steadily expanded every year since 2017. These photos were pre-COVID. So we would host parades, banners, soccer tournaments, football tournaments, races for kids, and there were prizes. It was for the kids, it was to pay their school fees. For the women's groups, we actually made a contribution to their shared account that they could pull money from whenever they needed. And so during these times, we shared information and exposed the local people on the importance of protecting the forest, promoted a lot of our programs like agroforestry, women's groups, and the importance of keeping your kids in school for education, where we could also expose them to more conservation education on protecting the forest. However, this past year, we were not allowed to have giant celebrations of 18,000 people around the reserve. So instead, we turned to radio broadcasts, which is something that we are absolutely going to incorporate, kind of a hybrid model that everyone's kind of doing now, because everyone can do things virtually. incorporating a hybrid model, but we focused solely on radio broadcasts. Because this is such a remote area, it takes 2.5 to 3 days to get there from the US. You can see the dense rainforests that we have to fly over to get there, the horrible roads. Radio is the primary form of communication for news, entertainment, or sharing any sort of information to a wide community. No one really has TVs in around the reserve. In the bigger cities, you might have TVs, but there's no big cities in the reserve. But everyone has a radio. So this is the primary, and everyone has their radio going. When you drive through the town of Apulu, on the street, there are like 30 radios going at the same time. And so it's a little bit, it's a little bit much for me, but radio is the primary form of communication. So we did all of our education programs on radio, and we adapted it to focus on the One Health approach because we're in a time of COVID. We just got over Ebola in June, late June of last year, and then we started getting right into COVID in the area. And so we focused on the importance of human health and how it directly intersects and is connected with environmental health and the health of the animals around us. And so that's what all of our education focused on these radio broadcasts. And they seem to be very, very successful. We even incorporated a lot of historical perspective of the reserve because it was interesting to find out most of the people that live in Apulu now are domestic immigrants. So that, I mean, domestic by them coming from other areas of Congo to Apulu. And a lot of people had no idea of the history of the reserve, the importance of the Mabuti Pygmy and preserving their traditional culture, importance of involving them in society. And so that was probably our most popular broadcast, was the importance of the history of the Okapi Wildlife Reserve and the importance of the Mabuti Pygmy to the local culture. One thing that kind of came about because of World Okapi Day, also started with the Greater Orlando AZAC chapter, was Okapitoberfest, because it's in October. World Okapi Day is in October, and Oktoberfest is typically in September or October of each year. Greater Orlando started doing this celebration, this event at a local brewery called Okapitoberfest. And so I think Jacksonville AZAC kind of jumped on the bandwagon the second year, and they reached out to Peppermint Narwhal. I'm sure there's a lot of keepers on here that are very familiar with Peppermint Narwhal. And so they designed this incredible logo, despite the lederhosen covering the best part of the Okapi. They designed this incredible logo for Okapitoberfest. And now AZAC chapters across the country are celebrating Okapitoberfest to raise money for Okapi Conservation Project. The origin of Okapi Conservation Project started with zoos. So many of our staff, the founders, were working in zoos that started the Okapi Conservation Project. We provided Okapi to zoos for the Okapi Conservation, or from the Okapi Conservation Project. And now zoos provide a third of our operating revenue every single year. That's a huge portion of support from zoos around the world, and it's critical to maintaining our work in the Congo. And so 85% of zoos that house Okapi actually contribute to Okapi Conservation Project. And this has been a longstanding relationship. I think if zoos were interested in Okapi, you had to show proof that you were supporting Okapi conservation. And I think a lot of SSPs, species survival plans, I mentioned that a little bit in the beginning of the presentation, they now require you, or it shows that you are invested in this species wild counterparts. And so a lot of zoos that were interested in Okapi, they needed to contribute to Okapi conservation to receive Okapi. And it's kind of blossomed into this wonderful relationship with zoos. Zoos play an absolutely critical role in the protection of animals, plants, and ecosystems around the world. So much expertise and so much stuff that we've learned about Okapi have come from zoos. So many studies about their infrasonic communication. That's something we never would have known over in Congo. We would never have thought about doing that, but those were provided by several zoos in the United States, those studies. And so this relationship with zoos has just blossomed into an incredible partnership. And I'm just so happy to be here with Maryland Zoo. Maryland Zoo has been a longtime supporter of our work. And I just have to give a huge shout out to all of our staff in Congo. Primarily the reason that I'm giving this presentation from Jacksonville is because I have reliable internet. I know that internet is we have to rely on satellite internet, and it's very, very, very expensive to have internet at our station in Apulu. And even though it's expensive, it's not that reliable. And so I do have to give a shout out to all of our staff, all of our 45 plus staff that are in and around the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. A big shout out to Rosie, our in-country director, Ella May and Julien, our accountants, Bears, who's our program manager, Manga, who's in charge of education, Movie, who's in charge of agroforestry, Mbete, who's in charge of all of our construction projects, and Molawai, who's in charge of our Okapi dispensary, facilitating all of our healthcare, and all of our educators and agroforestry workers. They're the ones that really keep this project running. I'm just here to provide support and find the funding to support their work. And I think that they're the ones that should really get the recognition and the shout out because they're the most resilient and dedicated staff that there is. Congo is, again, the most difficult conservation region to work on Earth, battling rebel groups, infrastructure issues, horrible internet access, and just being able to adapt and be resilient. And they are some of the most patient people. Dealing with all of this stuff, especially with COVID. COVID was a breeze for all of our staff there, just because we've dealt with Ebola and so many things that were much, much worse. But with that, I want to end my presentation on this peaceful video of a female okapi in the dense forest near Apulu. Okay, I think that's it.
Oh, that's amazing. You know, the story that you've just been telling us really shows the complexity of conservation and, you know, the approach that you all have been taking is, you know, you're doing conservation with the local people and not to the local people.
Yes.
So we really appreciate you sharing that and really pointing out that human element and the importance of that.
The conservation is in people or animals can live without, hold on, what do I say? What do I say? Animals can live without people, but people cannot live without, nature can live without people, but people cannot live without nature. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of people don't know that when you get into conservation, it's really working with people. You're not really working with animals. I've never seen a wild okapi. I've worked with an okapi a few times at the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, but that had nothing to do with my work with Okapi Conservation Project. My work is working with people. And if you want to conserve animals, plants, ecosystems, you have to work with people because, well, ultimately people are usually the issue. And you have to find these different strategies to kind of find a balance for people and make sure that their needs are met. And then also find that the needs for the animals and the ecosystems are met as well.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Well, we do have a number of questions. I know time is running short. We want to be respectful of your time.
I did talk a little bit long.
But we will definitely take some of these questions. We have some young friends here with us. So I'm going to start off with Kason, who's 6 years old and wants to know when the babies leave their mom.
So that we still, I think that's based on when the okapi is ready to leave. And so that could be different behavioral cues that we'll notice that the okapi is starting to separate from the mom. I would say usually about a year. And that's based off of what it is in zoos. We don't know what it is in wild. We don't know if there's a differentiation between the two. But I would say usually about a year.
Okay. Right. So I have a question from, it looks like from a teacher,
Okay.
where one of her students wanted to know how many okapi are in the preserve and how do you determine that population estimate?
Sure. So we estimate about 3,000 to 3,500 are in the reserve. Right now, those population estimates are done every 2 to 3 years, and they do on-foot transects. So they walk the entire reserve looking for signs of okapi, primarily feces. So they're looking for okapi poop. And then they actually determine, it's really cool how they do this. There's a formula that they use on the decomposition rate of poop to kind of get an estimated number of how many okapi are in the reserve. And so that's where they come to that 3,000 to 3,500 number. We are looking to actually do a more robust study with, I did forget to mention that Wildlife Conservation Society runs the reserve with ICCN in a co-management partnership. So we're looking to support Wildlife Conservation Society and ICCN on a camera trap study to do a better, more robust analysis of their numbers.
Okay. I have a question from 8-year-old Nathan, who loves okapis and would like to know what he can do to help okapis right now. And what should he study if he wants to work with okapis when he grows up?
Sure. So what you can do right now is the easiest thing that anyone can do. And that's just tell your friends about Okapi. So many people around the world don't know what an Okapi is. And that's one of our biggest struggles. And you can't convince people to start protecting Okapi until they know what an Okapi is. So what you can do for me and what you can do for Okapi is tell all of your friends about Okapi, how cool they are, make them fall in love with Okapi, and then they'll be motivated to save them. Oh, and then I would just study biology or something with animal sciences to work with Okapi.
Great. Lily asks, how do you know, or how do the researchers working in the field distinguish the okapis? How do they determining which one is which?
Oh yeah, so they each stripe pattern is unique to each individual. So just like your fingerprints, just like the stripes on a zebra, the stripes on a tiger, the spots on a leopard, each Okapi stripe pattern is unique to that individual.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's amazing. They really are amazing animals. We do have someone here who said, you know, what's kind of the most interesting fact that you would sort of pull out of your back pocket to throw out to a zoo guest at Jacksonville or anywhere else? What is your favorite?
Well, the first one I always say is that the calves don't poop for the first 2 months of their lives. That usually gets them hooked. And then they also exude a brown oil from their skin. That kind of, it's thought to provide some insect repellent or some waterproofing in the rainforest. So if you ever have the lucky chance of petting an okapi at a zoo, you'll get a brown oily residue on your fingers. They also release like a tar-like scent substance between the hooves on their feet, and that kind of leaves a scent trail around. They communicate through infrasound, so we can't hear their communication, but other okapi can hear their communication. So many cool things.
Right. Let's see. Got a lot of things now coming in. Trying to see which ones kind of maybe go together a little bit. It looks like we had actually someone who is watching this via YouTube. Oh, nice. who was asking about your comment early on where you had the photo of 9 okapis together in sort of one area. And of course, you know, we're more used to seeing the okapis singly, being more solitary. But the question from our YouTube viewer was, you know, what would happen? Why don't we see multiple okapis typically in zoos? Would they not get along is what
so I think what a lot of zoos do is see how okapi react to other okapi. So typically okapi are solitary, and we know that from the wild. The only time they come together is to either mate or if it's a mother that has a calf that's following her. And so that is just a typical behavior for okapi. Sometimes you'll get several okapi that are more tolerant of being in a space with other Okapi. And so in that instance, you could put them together. I know that there are some occasions, I've spoken with some zookeepers that actually house 3 or 4 Okapi in the same space together. So you do see that on occasion, but primarily, and that's based off of those individual behavioral characteristics, and they tolerate other Okapi. But for the most part, Okapi are kept solitary. So when you go to a zoo, most of the time you'll see only one on exhibit. Sometimes you'll see 2, 3, sometimes 4. And that's just because those Okapi are known to get along with each other.
Right. I do have a question from one of our Okapi keepers here. And she was asking, I think she's alluding to the gentleman you mentioned who came and told you all that there was an Okapi on his property. So she's asking, does your staff get a lot of reports from community members that Okapi come close to their properties, or is that even rare?
That's rare. Yeah. So this was kind of like mind-blowing news. We really never get any reports of Okapi that are close. We'll get reports of signs of Okapi, so footprints. Their fecal pellets will be in a farm or something like that. Some chewed leaves nearby, but we have never, not to my knowledge, we've never received a report of an Okapi actually coming out of the forest in front of people and tolerating people. Now, when I say that it tolerates people, I mean they're several yards away. But normally, if you're in the forest, because the forest is so dense, if you make noise, they will run away. So they will run away before you even know that they're there. They know you're there several minutes before you even know that you're even coming up to them. But yeah, that was the first report we've ever gotten of an Okapi actually coming out of the forest in the presence of humans.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It looks like maybe we'll take time to answer one more if that's still okay with you, Lucas. Okay. This is also from a keeper who's asking how the Okapi Conservation Project goes about finding and hiring staff sort of in country. She comments that your community outreach seems very, very impressive, and would like to know how you're going about finding those staff members.
So that's actually really difficult. I give a testament to all of our staff there for being able to find people to want to move to Upolu or some of these remote places. It's difficult to find people. There's a lot of people that need employment in the region, but it's finding the right person for the right job. And there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want to move to Upolu because it's away from good schools, it's away from easy access to any necessities or materials, because the closest big city is Mombasa, which is about 2 hours away. But even there, you can't get all of your specific needs. You can't really buy computers there. You have to drive 6 or 8 hours to Bunia or Butembo in order to get a computer if you need a computer. And so sometimes it's difficult to convince people to move to Upolu because it's so remote. But I do have to give a testament to all of our staff on the ground for finding the right people for the right jobs.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for all of you who submitted questions, and to those we were not able to have time to get to, we do apologize, but we're so glad you all joined us today. We want to thank you again, Lucas, for taking time to speak to all of us today. This was an amazing story that you're telling. For those of you watching, if you would like to make a donation to support the work of the Okapi Conservation Project, there should be a link in the chat box for you to access a link on the Maryland Zoo's website that will let you donate to the Okapi Conservation Project. So we hope you will consider donating. And we also want to thank our sponsor, SC&H Group, once again, for helping us to bring this virtual Field Talk series to a wide audience. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Lucas Mears. That was an amazing presentation. We appreciate that. And we hope all of you out there will join us for another Field Talk. We have one more left in this series in March, so we hope you'll all join us then as well. Everybody take care. Have a great day.
Bye.